What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. My name is Trevor Steele, a paramotor instructor and founder of Backcountry PPG. And in today's video, I wanted to break down one of the recent paramotor adventure days, you could say, that I had out here in Salt Lake City, Utah. This summer, I was fortunate enough to sneak in some truly incredible flying. And this particular day, I managed to sneak in two big cross-country flights that were nearly an hour, 2 hours each. I wanted to make this video because I want to break down some of my thinking around wind, rotor, approaching terrain, how I picked my lines, and other things that I was thinking about in the process. Now, this footage is fairly raw Insta360 video that I'm just jumping on a voiceover and breaking down after the fact. So with all of that being said, this is going to be a somewhat technical breakdown. Let's get right into it. Okay, so this first flight is from a small mountain town up in the mountains just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm not going to say the name of it because I don't want this LZ to get blasted. Please, please, please don't go fly here without a little bit of a briefing. One of the things that I want to talk about is the difference in launching at higher altitudes. It's super unforgiving. If you're unfamiliar with what it means and what changes as you go up in altitude, the air becomes thinner, which means you need to run further, you need to run faster, and overall your launches are harder. The two most noticeable things is one, the inflation is harder, and two, the launch is longer and faster. So those are your most notable changes when you go from low altitude to high altitude. Well, here launching at higher altitudes, the thing that really stands out to me and the thing that I've learned through teaching our adventure training classes where we have low altitude pilots coming here and trying to fly at high altitudes is how much more perfect you have to be with technique. When you're at low altitude, you could screw a whole bunch of stuff up. You could just mash the A's, you can dump the A's early, you can hit a whole bunch of brakes, and because you just have such thick air, it almost doesn't matter. It's more forgiving, it's more understanding of mistakes. Whereas here at higher altitudes, dude, you have to be clean, you have to be consistent, you have to have certain things. One of the common mistakes I see all the time with low altitude pilots is they release A's too early. If you start watching videos of myself launching, not saying that I'm absolutely perfect because I know there's room for improvement, one of the things that I do consistently do is I hold my A's all the way to the top. You have to hold them all the way to 12 o'clock. If you release the A's early at higher altitudes, chances are the glider is not going to make it overhead. It's going to fall down. The only way you can kind of compensate for this is two things. One, you're an athletic freak that can run like a madman, or two, you apply throttle to help you pick up in speed. And ultimately, those two techniques do save the day, but we're all in pursuit of perfect technique and being as good and dialed as possible. So holding those A's at 12 o'clock definitely makes a difference. Having done a lot of training at low altitudes, having done a lot of training at high altitudes, if you perfect the high altitude flying, everything else is easier. One of the good things and big benefits of our adventure training up here in Utah and our beginner training up here in Utah is you're learning in a hard environment. You're testing yourself, you're challenging yourself. You're seeing how close to perfection your technique is. Because if you've got bad technique, you're definitely gonna know. All right, guys, so I really didn't want to make this video just some big old lesson preachy thing, but I have a feeling that's kind of what it's going to roll into. A lot of this flight actually demonstrates and shows what I call classroom theories. Things that we discuss in the classroom, things that we discuss in ground school that may not make sense until you can visualize and actually see, or even better, experience them for yourself. So moving forward from the launching conversation that we just had, again, I'm going to try to keep this a little bit shorter. I ended up taking off and heading north towards some 10, almost 11,000 foot mountain peaks. As I started to approach up there, I already knew this beforehand because I checked weather. The wind was rather strong, somewhere around 15 to 20 miles an hour. Now, if you've been paying attention to previous videos or you've come through one of my training classes, you'll know that I'm very strict on my 6 miles an hour for mountain flying. And I really wanted to expand a little bit more on this. I also wanted to discuss rotor channels and the rotor length just a little bit more. So let's quickly have that wind conversation. Here's the thing with wind, and here's the thing with my 6 mile an hour cutoff. Hypothetically, you as a paraglider can handle all the way up to 30 miles an hour or whatever your cruising speed happens to be. And in an even more hypothetical, you can handle more than that if you're not expecting to come down in that much wind. Meaning if you've got 50 miles an hour of wind at 15 15,000 feet where there's no terrain, you could handle that, and that could even be a smooth 50 miles an hour. Your ground speed into the wind is going to be 20 backwards, and with the wind is going to be something like, what, 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour? So if you wanted to make Mexico, that would be a great time to do so. Moving on from that, here's the thing with the wind. It's a question of where you are in the terrain, what your objective of the flight is, and overall, what are you trying to do? If you're wanting to fly in close proximity to the terrain, which is largely the biggest, most important, and most fun thing for paramotor pilots, you're not going to be able to in 15 to 20 miles an hour of wind. If you notice in these clips, I'm well above the mountains. In fact, I'm probably at 12,000, if not even a little higher than that, 1,000, 2,000 AGL above the mountains. I'm up there because all the way up there, and I don't really have to worry about the rotor. And in 15, 20 mile an hour winds, we're going to have some seriously intense rotor, which we're going to loop back to in a second. But with the mountain flying, it's about what is your objective. The reason I make such firm cutoffs at 6 miles an hour, and I mean very firm with my new students, is if you go up in under 6 miles an hour, the likelihood of having a great flight that is smooth and calm and you can explore in all the directions and places that you want to is much higher. In fact, it's almost guaranteed as long as you have under 6 miles an hour. But if you've got over 6 miles an hour, now everything changes. Venturi becomes a much bigger deal. Rotor becomes a much bigger deal. Ridge lift is a much bigger deal. Everything starts to change. And it's not that 7 miles an hour is some crazy death number and all of a sudden you got to worry about it. But over 6 miles an hour, now it starts to become a thing. And as you creep closer and closer to 10 and even 15 and even 20, it all amplifies. That dial of intensity doesn't scale linearly, it scales exponentially. 15 miles an hour is far more vicious than 7.5 miles an hour, which is far more vicious than 3.5. So bringing that back to the original comment around wind, the reason I'm so disciplined and so firm with my wind cutoffs is, again, the objective of the flight. Nobody's putting a gun to your head forcing you to go to the top of the mountain. This is a leisurely fun flight. And if you notice in this particular day, when the wind is 15, 20 miles an hour, I'm really high. I'm all the way up. I'm not getting any proximity to the terrain. I'm not getting any visual of the lake. I'm not foot dragging the top of the trees, right? I'm not doing the kind of thing that makes paramotoring so special. I'm also taking a lot more risk. If for whatever reason I have an engine out, I don't have the glide slope that I may need to make certain spots because I just can't penetrate the wind, in which case I may actually have to come down in the leeward side of an object. So I have to think about that. There's more planning, there's more preparation, there's more thinking beforehand. Now, one of the things I always tell students is you should never fly a blind sky. If you're going to be flying to the top of this mountain, like I am in this particular day, you need to already know what the predictions are going to be. We're fortunate enough here in the West Coast that we've got a lot of mountains with weather stations on the top of them. An app that I use to learn what the wind is Wind Alert. I'll open that up and I'll look at all the local weather stations. I also will check a website called ppg.report, which is going to give me my winds aloft. That way I can know roughly what the wind is going to be up there before I make it up there. And then as I'm approaching, as I'm flying this bigger terrain, if it's within my cutoffs, I proceed. If it's outside of what I'm willing to handle, I go home. I have to have good discipline here. You have to make sure you follow the protocols, follow the cutoffs. You are not an exception. What can happen will happen to you, and you have to know where your line is. Moving on from that wind conversation, let's talk a little bit more about rotor. Now, here's a good thing with rotor. It is only ever going to be exactly where it is supposed to be, meaning it's not just going to come out of the blue. Where it is supposed to be, it's going to be. And the hard part with rotor is knowing exactly where what I refer to, the rotor channel, is going to start and is going to stop. Now, the rotor channel is going to have a very firm, what I call tipping point between where it doesn't exist and where it does exist. And as a paramotor pilot that's moving fairly slow and can change altitude quickly and can change altitude slowly, what you can do is you can kind of sniff around for it. Now, I don't encourage this if you've got more than 6 miles an hour of wind. That's a whole nother story. But essentially, if you've got a rotor channel on the backside of a mountain, you could just slowly approach the leeward side of said mountain until you start to feel the tickle of the turbulence. And now you know about what that rotor channel is going to be. What's your height in relation to the peak? What's your distance in relation to the peak? In this particular case, as I approached on this mountain, I had actually dropped below the rotor channel and was in what's called a wind shadow. In the bottom of this little valley, I actually had somewhat smooth conditions, and I could have flown around in there and had a great time, but it wasn't my objective. I wanted to make it to the top of these mountain peaks. As I started to climb, guess what I flew right into? The rotor channel. Now, I could handle myself in these conditions in that amount of rotor that far away from the terrain, but I just continued to climb, and guess what happened? I poked out the top of the rotor channel. So I literally found myself underneath and above it and could draw this imaginary line of that rotor channel from the mountain. The only reason I really did this in this particular situation was for said video educational purposes, to show this to my students and I guess to show that to the internet on YouTube. But the whole point of this conversation is Rotor has a very distinct, very definite starting point and stopping point. And B, it is never just going to be out of the blue. It is exactly where it's supposed to be. Now, how far the rotor travels, how low it goes below the peak, how high it goes below the peak, that is all very dependent on the shape of the peak itself, the wind direction, and the wind speed. So that's one of those things where the answer is it depends, and you kind of need a little bit of experience. But the whole point of this conversation was that you could see and visualize in the real world example what a rotor channel looks like. Now, let's say I continue to approach towards the peak and I hit the rotor once again. All I have to do is turn around and fly away, climb up a little bit higher, and proceed towards it. If you're unsure on wind direction and you're not sure where the rotor is going to be, the safest way to approach on terrain is by climbing above the terrain. Not just a little bit above, a couple hundred feet, maybe 500, even 1,000. The more, the better, and proceed towards the top of the mountain. Now, the good thing is if you stay within the 6 miles an hour cutoff that I continue to mention, you don't really need to be worried about rotor. There isn't really any rotor, as if there's no wind, there is no rotor. So I would refer to anything under 4 to 6 miles an hour as virtually no wind, and up to 6 miles an hour, the rotor isn't really going to become a big deal. Now, I always get the question of how do you identify wind direction as you're approaching on terrain, and that's a great question. There's two main ways. One, you can fly a circle. In this circle, you'll identify which way you are drifting faster or slower. However, that only works if you're low. So if you're higher up, you fly the same circle, but looking at your phone. That way you can identify which direction your ground speed is the greatest and which direction your ground speed is the slowest. Now, the other way that works if you have more than 6 miles an hour of wind is what's called crabbing. Essentially, you're pointing one direction, but flying a different direction. And that is because there's enough wind that your glider needs to somewhat shift into the wind to go the direction you actually want to go. If you notice that you're crabbing, one, you've surpassed your 6 miles an hour of cutoff. And two, it's easy to now identify what the wind direction actually is. And as soon as you notice that you're crabbing, it is not a bad idea to identify exactly which way the wind direction is by slowly turning yourself into the wind until you no longer crab. Now you know which side of the mountain you need to not be on and which side of the mountain you should be on. All right, guys, thank you for bearing with me on the mumbo jumbo educational. I guess it's just the instructor in me that I literally can't stop teaching. Anyways, moving on from that, as this flight continued on, I really had to go to the bathroom. I needed a place to go pee, and I just really like to land on top of mountains, so I found myself landing on the top of this mountain here. Now, here's the deal with mountaintop landings. It can get kind of tricky because one, you're at higher altitudes. Two, how much wind is there? Which way is the wind direction? And three, if you approach like you normally approach above the terrain, it's easy to drift off the end of the terrain. So anytime I'm coming in to land on something like this, if I have the ability to be at the top or at the peak, you could say, of the mountain itself, and or even better, ever so slightly below the mountain, then I will choose to do so and kind of float my way up. Now, interesting thing with wind, interesting thing with mountains, something you have to keep in mind is what's happening here is not happening everywhere. This particular mountain peak that I do end up landing on, there's literally no wind. I have to do a forward launch off of it. Even though another 1,000 feet up on those neighboring mountains, which I'm maybe 5 miles from, if that, there's 20 miles an hour of wind. So it's important to remember as you're flying through mountains that what's happening here isn't happening everywhere. And there's most likely a place within the terrain that's going to be calm, that's going to be smooth, that you can enjoy a nice and easy flight. Now, mountaintop landings can get dynamic when you're going to launch off of them. The last thing you want to do is force something. I kind of have this rule of thumb when I'm mountain landing, when I'm flying in terrain like this, that stuff has to happen naturally. It has to happen easily. If I feel like I have to force something, it's usually when mistakes get made. That's usually when I trip and fall down and break a prop. And thankfully with a mountain, if you break the prop, it's not the end of the world. You can glide your way down, but still it's a broken prop. So I did manage to do a nice forward launch, and I am going to stop talking and put some raw video here of me just kind of carving my way down this mountain. I thought it was kind of fun, and we'll jump back on here in a minute. All right, guys, so that was flight number 1 of the day. I have to be like the luckiest man alive that I get to fly so much. Thank you to everybody who helps support this channel by coming through training classes, purchasing equipment, all of that stuff. Anyways, thank you, thank you, thank you. Flight number 2 of this day was after I landed, refueled, and noticed that the weather conditions were still absolutely primo. It was now pushing 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. And for those of you that don't know, because a lot of the people that watch this channel are either A, very new paramotor pilots themselves, or B, looking to get into paramotoring. So all of you experienced pilots, this may sound like repetition. But around 10 o'clock in the morning, it does vary depending on the time of year, you start to get what's called a thermal. Now, in order to understand a thermal, we must first understand turbulence. Turbulence, in a very basic sense, is wind changing in direction and or speed. Now, a thermal is a pocket of hot rising air. So you essentially have this column of air that is going upward. The whole thing is going up. The wind is literally pointing up. And the thing with a thermal is inherently a thermal is turbulent, because turbulence is wind changing in direction. And as you go from the horizontal wind to the vertical wind back to the horizontal wind, aka you enter and exit the thermal, it's turbulent. Turbulence is essentially the glider is not perfectly overhead. It's going forward, it's coming back, it's moving around, it's dancing, it's all of those things. So commonly, paramotor pilots do not fly in thermic conditions. And the reason we don't fly in thermic conditions is we don't have to fly in them. We as paramotor pilots have this magical throttle that pushes us into the sky. And so we can choose to fly in the more calm conditions. And the reason we often choose the calm conditions is because, again, like I mentioned earlier in this video, the really fun thing of paramotoring is proximity. Getting low to the ground, exploring the valleys, the crooks, the crannies, foot dragging the water, all of the things related to that is what makes paramotoring so cool. If you want to go 10,000 feet up, that's when you get in a Cessna. And that's the thing, is we're not really looking for that kind of experience. But midday flying, as we refer to it, and or flying when it's thermic, is a different experience. Now, I'm going to have more altitude. I'm going to be riding these pockets of hot rising air. I'm going to be getting bounced around. It's going to be more dangerous because of this turbulence. And overall, it's going to be a more dynamic experience. Now, most paramotor pilots do not choose to fly in these conditions. I'm a bit of an exception. In paragliding, you actively seek out thermic conditions because the only way to stay up in paragliding is either ridge lift, where wind blows up an object and you ride that upward wind, or thermals. Well, I find myself thermaling on a regular basis in paragliding, and I love the art of thermaling. It's a mind game, it's a challenge, it's a puzzle that you have to constantly be solving, and you're always on the edge of sinking out, which is kind of fun. But for me, I really like to combine the two, paramotoring and paragliding, where I get to go and I get to ride this lift and I get to ride the thermals and I get to do all of that. But I also have that throttle and I can get a little closer to the terrain and I can venture into areas that a paraglider pilot would never go because they just don't have the lift, or they're risking sinking out, or any of those things. I kind of get to mesh the two worlds. So this particular flight I took off, it's already starting to get thermic. It's early in the day, so it's nothing crazy. And thankfully the LZ is right on a lake, so my launch and landing is going to be nice and smooth because the lake effect takes over. Anyways, if you want more information on that, come through one of our training classes. Moving on from there, I head towards these other peaks. Now, these are like the really jagged, rough, rugged ones in the Wasatch Mountain Range, which is the range that runs north and south just on the east side of Salt Lake City. Well, the wind conditions are still the same at the very, very top, but down lower, kind of closer to the valley on this first ridge, we've actually got a little bit of wind coming through the main valley, producing a bit of a venturi, which is giving me wind conditions that are borderline ridge soarable. So re-looping back to the paragliding thing, the two things that you do to stay up is ride ridge lift or a thermal, so I'm actively seeking out ridge lift. I just find it so stinking fun. There's just something about being idle and going up that's so cool. As long as you know what's going on. There's exceptions that make that terrifying. But I had a great time doing some ridge soaring on this mountain. It was definitely turbulent. There was lots of terrain upwind of me, producing somewhat rough air. Overall, the sky just wasn't super calm. Sometimes you can have thermic conditions that are super rowdy, and sometimes you can have thermic conditions that are a little bit smoother. It depends on the terrain, it depends on your location, it depends on the time of year, it depends on the humidity level, it depends on so many things, the pressure. Anyways, I was having a good time, ridge soaring a little bit, exploring mountains that I have a feeling not a lot of people get to explore. That's kind of like one of the things with paramotorings that's so cool, is you get to see terrain from a perspective that most people never do. Like, I drive past this mountain all the time, but I've never seen it from the top, 30 feet off the ground, or even better, 3 feet off the ground. And I have a feeling not many people get to have that experience without hiking all the way to the top of it, which this is a mountain that's outside of the traditional hiking path. So again, I have a feeling not many people a year go up here, especially as I venture a little bit deeper into the next range and the next mountain peak. And that's just the cool thing for me, is what's over there, what's over the next mountain, what's on the other side of that hill, what is down in those trees. And that's the thing that makes paramotoring so cool, is that exploration, that adventure, that exploring that you get to have. So bringing that all back full circle, as I approached on the bigger peak, I did ultimately decide to turn back. It's too much wind. The peak shapes, the actual shape of the ridge itself is very sharp, meaning there's very sharp edges. It shoots straight up. What that essentially means is the rotor is going to be more intense. You need to understand that the shape of the object is changing the intensity, location, and duration of rotor. There's something that I refer to as the separation point, which is the point in which the wind separates from the terrain. Depending on where that separation point, the rotor is going to be. Rotor will always be right where the separation point is. Needless to say, these peaks that are straight up and down, that separation point is going to be right on top. And I just had a feeling that that wind at this 15, 20 miles an hour, straight up those peaks from the south, overall, it was a situation that I wasn't super in love with. I didn't want to take the risk. I didn't want to find myself in a situation that I didn't want to be in. And I chose to turn back and fly back to that mountain another day. I have yet to return, but it's now on my bucket list to make it up to those jagged rocks on a smoother, calmer day. As I turned back, like I said, the lake was producing smooth air. If you wanted a little bit of an explanation on that, there's two things in relation to the lake. Number one, in order for a thermal to be created, there has to be temperature change. So if you look at the surface of the earth, when it's the ground, not the water, every 15 feet heats up a little bit differently. There's an altitude change, or there's corn in one spot and asphalt in another, concrete in another, a telephone pole. There's just change. And it's that change in heat that produces the pockets of hot rising air. Well, the only thing that doesn't heat up differently is water. So if you've got something like a lake, you have something like an ocean, the two are going to heat up similarly. So you will not have thermic activity over a lake, over an ocean. Maybe it will a little bit if you've got some like sandbars that are popping up and stuff like that, if you really wanted to get into the nuances. But overall, a lake doesn't produce thermic activity. Alright guys, with all of that being said, hopefully you learned a couple things in this video. I didn't intend for it to be this rambling video where I was just talking about things and teaching the entire time. Honestly, I went into this video thinking it was going to be more like the last video where I was walking you through my flights and leaving some empty footage for you just to watch. But needless to say, hopefully you learned some things. Hopefully this will help keep some future paramotor pilots safe. Ultimately, that is a large, overwhelming goal of a lot of the content that I create. If somebody stumbles upon a video that helps them make a better decision in the future, that keeps them safe and out of harm's way, then all of the effort, time, energy was worth the investment. All of that being said, if you guys are interested in learning how to fly, we offer a 10-day beginner training program out of Salt Lake City, Utah in the spring, summer, fall, and out of Salton Sea, California in the wintertime. We also offer a 5-day adventure training program where you will come with me on a handful of different adventures, and I will work with you on helping you improve your skill sets. Visit backcountryppg.com for more information on both of those training programs, or give me a call at 801-599-1684. Thank you for watching, like this video, subscribe, and I will see you next time.